Welcome to History Before Us, the YouTube channel where we uncover, explore, and preserve the untold stories of our past. I'm your host, Frederick Murphy, and I'm dedicated to capturing the intricacies of history, race, and culture through the voices of those who lived it. Today, we're diving into Christmas in Underground Railroad history with Conductor D. I'm going to allow her to introduce herself in just one moment, but first, before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to History Before Us and share these videos with others who will appreciate it. So alright, sister, let's get started. Tell us who you are and what it is that you do.
Good morning. I'm Dion Patterson, also known as Conductor D. I'm a Delaware-based history business where I'm passionate about telling the untold stories of African Americans, particularly as it pertains to antebellum and the colonial time period and the Underground Railroad.
Absolutely. And you are great at doing it.
Thank you.
I've seen your work. I've been a part of it into a certain in certain capacities, and you just do great work. And I kind of want to first get everyone acclimated with how you and I met. It was social media, if I remember correctly. I feel like during the pandemic, a lot of people got started there, where everyone's Black history accounts, due to the killings, the unfortunate killings that we had over during the pandemic of brown and Black folks, kind of created this barrage of new followers, people that were coming to learn more about our history. And I think that was during the timeline in which I had come across your account. And then we connected physically, face to face, when we met at, what was our first meeting?
Was it North Carolina?
It was in Guilford County. Yeah. It was in Guilford County, North Carolina. And it was, of course, about the Underground Railroad. And then during that whole process, actually prior to that, we were doing some DNA and some ancestry sleuthing and found out that we connected on multiple chromosomes from a DNA standpoint. So Conductor D and I are actually blood cousins as well. So that has always made this relationship that much more special, because we're just history buffs, history nerds, if you will. And there are a lot of people that are doing some Underground Railroad things, but there's not a lot of folks that are doing it to the capacity in which you are. And I mean, every day you're finding new nuggets and gems. The other day you posted something about Christmas. Today is December the 21st, so obviously we're 4 days away from Christmas. That spoke to the Underground Railroad. And holidays for most people, specifically in present day, are times that are very joyful, right? Very spirited. Now, unless a person has lost a loved one, then they may be grieving during these time periods. And so, we're keeping you in thought. But for the enslaved community, what did this time of the year mean for them individually as well as their families, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so it varied, because you had, the one thing I want to clarify from the beginning is that not every enslaved person was on a plantation. A lot of people think that the only slavery was there, but there were enslaved firemen, there were enslaved artisans, there were people, there was a lot of urban slavery. Pretty much think about every job that existed in the city, and there were Black people who were required to work. So now we're speaking about specifically the plantation life, right?
Yes.
Enslavers would typically give their enslaved individuals extended leave. So you had sometimes some days leading up to Christmas and the days after Christmas to really come together and get a pass to visit family and friends that perhaps you hadn't even had a chance to see all year. But it was also a time where there was this looming threat. There was this darkness, because the first of the year was the time for accounts to be settled. So
when you say accounts, can you specify what that may mean for those who may not understand that?
Yes, that meant all enslavers needed to check their finances, and if they had any debt, they had to rectify it by the first of the year. And the way they did that was to use Black folks as currency. So you could be very excited about your time off. You finally can rest. Maybe you can catch up on some other things for yourself. There were a lot of enslaved individuals who built businesses. This might have been a time where they would get their goods together to sell. But then you hear that there's talk in the kitchen about you being sold.
Yeah.
Now, you may or may not even have an opportunity to say goodbye to anybody, you may have to go right away, because some people were being sold to the Deep South, which was, a sentence for life, right? You weren't coming back 9 times out of 10. And so they had to think fast about, how do I get out of here? A lot of people knew about the Underground Railroad, but they didn't know how to reach it. And then there were a lot of folks who just left and didn't have the Underground Railroad. Some left and stumbled upon it in their travels. But it was a time where people took advantage of that time and space, and some planned very strategically before they left, and others, it was life or death. I got to go now.
Yeah. When did you notice that in your research throughout your time of being a researcher, when did you notice more documents and, when did you gain a deeper insight that, hey, there's a trend that's happening here? During Christmas, this is what's transpiring in these or on these specific plantations or at these sites. When did that go off for you? When did that bell go off to where you were just like, you know what, this is something and I'm onto something, and these are the people that you've been able to research to validate left for those reasons?
Yeah, so I read a lot of narratives. Those are some of the best stories. It gives us a lot of insight into the Underground Railroad journey. And I noticed this trend. Left December the 21st, left December 24th. And I said, it seems like a lot of people are leaving during the holidays. So then I started looking at Underground Railroad conductors and their records, just to see, like, what times of the year are people really funneling in? Is there a time of the year that is used more frequently? And Christmas was it. So I started doing more research. Easter was another one where, Frederick Douglass left Easter the first time. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of people started leaving, and I recognized that, and then looked into what is the culprit. Why were so many people leaving? Because you hear about this time of celebration and dancing, and the women making necklaces and bracelets out of cowrie shells, and all this sharing that's taking place. But when you think about it, people always wanted to be free.
Sure.
And we are so intelligent and creative and find all these wonderful ways to make things happen, even in a very high-pressured situation, which slavery was. And so some people, knew, this is what I'm going to do. Like, I think about William and Ellen Craft. William so for anyone who
they're out of Charleston, right?
They were in Macon, Georgia. They did go through
Macon,
Charleston, though.
Yeah. I know I've seen them before with documents in Charleston in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So for anyone who may not know their story, the quick version of the story is this was a husband and wife duo. The husband was an individual who posed as the enslaved man of his wife, who disguised herself as a white planter. She was someone who could pass for white. She had the features of her enslavers and / relatives. And so they concocted this really elaborate plan, and they left from Macon, Georgia, hiding in plain sight, meaning they didn't hide in a boxcar. They weren't in a false bottom wagon. They were literally riding in the train cars with everyone else and put on this performance. Really, it was like a 3-day act. And it was so exhausting that when Ellen got to Philadelphia, she literally lost her ability to walk. Her anxiety was so high. But he knew that they were going to do this, so he started working on the side. So he's enslaved, but he's using the little bit of time that he has to start doing different things so he can make some money and to fuel their trip. And they planned it out and were very successful. So ultimately, they went from Macon, Georgia, all the way to Boston, Massachusetts.
To Boston. Yeah, getting to that safe space. For you, and how you may have viewed Christmas for the enslaved individuals prior to learning and understanding this knowledge, what was your perception of what it could have possibly been like before knowing that these folks were trying to get out of Dodge before Christmas struck?
Yeah, well, you think about people finally being able to embrace that level of humanity that they have been denied of all this time. And the ability to be able to not just go and do, but just to be. Enslaved people were not allowed to exhibit any type of emotion. You knew that you had to be two people at all times. You know, and in some respects, like we know about that, right, in the workplace. We can't compare what we go through in certain settings now and then, but the concept is generally the same. You cannot be your whole self. You know, they couldn't show fear. They couldn't laugh. They weren't free to laugh. Facial expressions, eye contact, creativity, all that was robbed. And now you have this little space where you can wake up and you own yourself. You own yourself for just a few days.
That's powerful. But you know, I would think that there would be a lot of advantages in also escaping during Christmas, because of the simple fact that when you have enslavers that may be party planning or guests coming into town and things like that, their focus may not necessarily solely be on their enslaved individuals, right? And so what are your thoughts about utilizing just the festive time of the year for those who did have the privileges to celebrate those things, as folks, that brothers and sisters that were enslaved, looking at this like, okay, this may be my one shot. And because this is my one shot, because there are a lot of other distractions that are around, or I'm responsible for going and retrieving X, Y, and Z, I had to take full advantage of it. So what are you, like, give me your angle on that.
So
and not only for this, but also for New Year's as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's twofold, because all that cooking, cleaning, planning, bed making, running errands, as you said, being able to serve all these parties, sometimes lasting, I know in the colonial time period, they partied till dawn. It was an extreme amount of work. It was like double the work. And then you also had the dynamic sometimes of people traveling from wherever they came from, and they would bring their enslaved population too. And so that was, you know, in some cases it might have been nice because you get to see someone that maybe you hadn't seen, or it could have been like, you're encroaching upon my space. You know, this is the little space that I have, and you gotta. They would stay for sometimes weeks at a time. So the holiday season, I think, was probably extremely stressful for enslaved individuals because their work would sometimes double or triple. But those passes gave you access, and that access meant if I'm caught, if I'm questioned, I can say, yes, I'm supposed to be out right now. I have permission to be. So that prevented bounty hunters and other patrollers from capturing people. So a lot of times enslavers gave people a license to escape and didn't even realize it. In some cases, people made up stories. There was one guy, I can't think of his name at the moment, but he lied and said, my mother's very ill, and for whatever reason, this particular enslaver probably worked with the mom previously. I won't say he cared, but he had some compassion towards the situation. And he said, if your mother's sick, here's a pass. Go and see about her, and we'll see you after the holidays. And he said, no, you won't. He took that pass. And his mama wasn't sick, and he took off, and he didn't come back. There's a woman from Delaware who was given the permission to go on a begging mission. And this woman, the enslaver, thought that she was like so wonderful because I'm going to allow my enslaved person to go and ask for money so she can buy herself and be free. She didn't go buy her, ask people for donations. She just simply left and freed herself. So there were all these kinds of things that were taking place. And it wasn't just the East Coast. This was all over the country. People were doing this.
You know, there's a 7-day stretch in which I call kind of like the stretch of hell when we talk about Christmas to New Year's. And based on some of the things I've read, you know, some of the folks that you know were going to be sold to, you know, take care of a debt or what have you, they may have been eating better during that time period because you had to have them looking presentable. They may have had some fresh clothing, of course, but also this was during the time of the year where they would actually allow their enslaved individuals to be inebriated and to drink as well. So can you talk about that aspect of enslavement during this time of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine it made them sick to their stomachs because you had these enslavers that were saying, "I have a gift for you." And first of all, the stuff in the gifts weren't gifts. They were necessities. They were clothes, they were shoes that they got one time a year. They were made out of the worst material, tow fabric, typically in the South, which for anyone who doesn't know is like, think about a potato sack. That itchy, coarse, cheap, no good material. And they did that not just because it was cheap, but they wanted to let them know that you're less than, right? You are less than. You can't dress like us. It was a way to distinguish the enslaved population. And that's another reason why raising money for clothes and sewing clothes were so important on the Underground Railroad, because once you got to the North, you couldn't look like that. You couldn't be wearing that. So back to these enslavers giving these gifts. They weren't gifts. And then some people were forced to drink. Some people really didn't even want to drink, but they were their enslavers telling them, taste this, have more. And then there were some who would place bets and different things on, who can stay sober the longest. It was just another form of manipulation, another way to make a person sick to their stomach. It was like, I have this control over you. It was really terrible.
Yeah, the manipulation and the governance of a person who, just like you said, even if they didn't want to drink, because that there's some type of course, manipulative act that would follow, right? Can get you drunk enough so you are going to, so you're not made cognitively aware that you're going to be sold, tomorrow or even tonight, right? Like, we're going to drink these spirits and I'm going to befriend you for just this time of the year. But the reality is I'm setting you up to not be cognitively aware of what's coming up next. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's the unfortunate manipulative nature that some of these enslavers did have. So when we talk about the Underground Railroad in general and this time of the year, do you have some names of some folks that you can say undoubtedly left during this time of the year in your research? And what has been one of the stories that stands out to you the most?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll start with Henry. Excuse me, Henry Bibb. He was an enslaved man who was the son of his enslaver. And he left Kentucky. He ran away multiple times. I was reading his narrative, and I think I lost count around 6 times. And it's not like he would return and they'd give him a slap on the wrist. Like, they tore that man's flesh up repeatedly. But he had this resilience and this grit where he was like, I will not be in chains. I'm going to die trying. I'm getting out of here. He made it to Detroit, got from Kentucky, then went on to Canada, and then said, I can't be here. I have to go back and get my wife. I need my wife here with me. He risked his freedom and went back to the Deep South, Kentucky, went and got I guess that's not really the Deep South. He went to Kentucky, to get his wife, only to find, are you ready for this one?
I'm not. Go ahead and break it.
She now has become the mistress of her enslaver. So,
oh no.
He said, and he talks about his level of embarrassment from that. He's like, before we even got married, we had this agreement that we were going to, that was like one of the prerequisites. Now we're like, when you think about different conversations that people have before they get married, they might say, we're going to be good with our finances. We're going to put family first. He's like, we're going to be free. And somewhere along the line, she thought he wasn't coming back. She thought he was dead. And she felt whatever, I wish I had her complete story, what was going through this woman's mind. Reason why she felt like she needed to become the mistress. So officially,
did she have children with the enslaver? Did she have any children with the enslaver?
I'm not sure if she did or not, but I know that she had children with Henry, and they were there, and she was sleeping in the bed with the enslaver. She was basically his play wife. He didn't have an actual wife, but of course, during that time period, they weren't calling her the wife. They refer to her in historic documents as the mistress. So that was kind of horrific, to say the least. But Henry escaped in 1837, and he became an Underground Railroad conductor. So this is someone, and I left out something really important. When he went back for his wife, who is now messing with the white dude, he gets caught, and he's now sold and back into the Institute of Slavery. But he escaped again. So now we're talking about like his seventh escape.
He's like the original Houdini.
Yeah, I mean, he was relentless. I would say him and Moses Roper are probably the worst in terms of number of times getting caught. Excuse me.
No, you're fine.
But the woman, the guy I'm thinking of who has probably the most standout story is Robert Brown, and he changed his name to Thomas Jones. Robert Brown was enslaved in Virginia, and it's a few days before Christmas, and his wife and his children are now sold. They're placed in a slave pen in Richmond, and he's trying to get them out. Of course, he can't get them out. You know, during that time when those kinds of things happen, if a spouse was on the outside, they would have gone from door to door asking people that they know, can you contribute? I need to try to raise some money quickly. They might have gone to some people who were white that they felt were allies and asked for a contribution. And they may have been simultaneously asking the enslaver, can I get a deal? Can I buy my family? I'll pay you, just tell me the price. All these different things, only for him to realize that this effort is fruitless. I'm not getting my family back. So his whole entire family has been snatched away from him during the holidays. So he decided, I'm not going to stay. I know that they're going to be sold to the Deep South. So I'm leaving. And with him, he took a lock of hair from each of his children and a daguerreotype or a picture of his wife. And he put it in his pocket, and then he rode a horse all the way as far as to freedom as he could go, which I believe he ended up losing his horse in Pennsylvania. But this man, now you know how cold it is now in December.
Yeah.
Just painting the picture for you. Remember, years ago, you didn't have global warming to take the edge off the cold.
It was just straight cold.
Ice cold.
Yeah.
And this man rode his horse through the Potomac River. He's completely soaked. His horse, horses can swim. I didn't know that initially. I was like, how did that work out? Like, how did he get across here? But the horse could swim. And it was there are certain parts of the Potomac River that are very low that people can cross. I wouldn't suggest it today that people do that. But, but he made it across and then got on the other side, which was still in Maryland, still a slave state, and his horse breaks down. The horse is like, I'm disabled, cannot go any further. So now he's on his own, but this man in the middle of December is drenched, and now the clothes are freezing upon his body.
Sure.
And he is holding on to these locks of hair and the picture of his wife with heartache. But he knows that this is what slavery has taught me. This is what this is the Frederick Douglass talks about the Institute of Slavery that he went through and what he learned through that process. Robert learned they're not for me. There's no need in me staying here because not only are you getting rid of my family, but I'm going to be next.
Yeah.
So he had to keep pushing. And he made it to William Still in Philadelphia. And William Still talks about this man pouring his heart out as he got there safely and placing the locks of hair of his children on the table and the picture of his wife. And you just imagine they're soaked.
That's tough.
But this is all you have. But he knew, and then I think about, he didn't get those locks of hair before they were put into the slave pen. Because why? Why would he have that? Yeah. He was careful enough and thoughtful enough to figure out a way that he could get some piece of his family to carry with him for the rest of his life. Because he knew that was going to be the end.
That was it. Man, that's just so tough to think about. You know what I'm saying? And so, in thinking back to, of course, holidays, quote unquote, back during that time, it was just a regular day for those folks. that were in bondage. You know what I'm saying? If not, of course, like you had mentioned, more anxiety stricken, just because of the simple fact that you knew that the inevitable would have potentially came with that. And it's kind of like when you look at, I don't know about you, but December, I'm always thinking about tax season. I'm like, let me go ahead and get everything squared away and prepare myself come February, March, April, to go ahead and get everything uploaded and submitted or what have you. This was a telltale time of the year for those folks that life in the way in which we've known it will probably never be the same if the person who they were enslaved by wasn't doing good, quote unquote, business. You know what I'm saying? Or if they just wanted to look at things from a capitalism standpoint and just sell someone off so they can become more wealthy. You know what I'm saying? And so, but shout out to that brother, because to your point, there was so much ingenuity that is innate or was innate in these folks, to where they had mentally and emotionally and perhaps spiritually as well prepared themselves for these separations, knowing that they weren't going to look pretty, of course, but doing what it is that they had to do. And with what that brother said, it kind of makes sense. It's like, well, I know they're going to be sent somewhere. I don't want to stay here, so let me try to self-liberate myself, potentially with the hopes of reconnecting with them, whether it was post-emancipation or him going down and rescuing them or buying them, like we've seen so many stories of brothers and sisters doing or what have you. So it's very, very powerful stuff for sure. Very powerful.
Yeah. I've got another one for you, because that reminds me of Frank Wanzer. So this was the Christmas Eve escape, and I talk about this one in my magazine. 1855 from Loudoun County, Virginia. There were 6 folks who left, 2 couples. And so 2 couples, and then you had 2 friends, and they made it. They got as far as Maryland, and they got attacked by a group of people who felt like they could overtake them. And this woman pulls out a pistol and is like, "Go ahead and shoot. Go ahead and shoot. I'm ready for you." So she's real animated, and they're intimidated. So
when you say this woman, are you saying that this was an enslaved woman that pulled out the?
This was an enslaved woman, and she had her pistol. She was ready. It's locked and loaded. She's ready, and telling them, "Go ahead, shoot. Go ahead and shoot." That was a time where you just didn't have black people being bold like that on a regular basis. So they were taken off guard completely.
Yeah.
So 2 of them, unfortunately, we don't really know what happened. We can assume that they were caught. But the 4, so the two couples, they made their way to freedom. And one of the couples was Frank Wanzer, and I think his wife was Mary. They got married by an Underground Railroad conductor in Syracuse, James Logan. So he was
beautiful,
an African American, formerly enslaved underground conductor who did help to free massive amounts of people, like over 1,000 people throughout upstate New York. They get to Canada, and Frank is like, I can't be here and enjoy this freedom without my mom, without my sister. Right? Harriet Tubman did the same thing. Like, how can you really enjoy freedom knowing that your loved ones are still in a system of oppression and you've lived it?
I'm sure that there's survivor's remorse that's there with that. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So Frank said to him, made this decision in his mind. He said, I'm not going to tell my wife because she's going to try to stop me. I'm not going to tell my friends. I'm not telling anybody. I'm just going to take $22 and 3 pistols, and I'm going back, and I'm going to get my mom. I'm going to get my mom, and I'm going to get my sister, and I'm going to bring them back to Canada. So after he had already gone through all these different things, I mean, traveling in the winter, there were less patrollers. You had more hours of darkness, so you could cover more ground. But there were other things. There was a risk of sickness. There was a high risk of frostbite. There were a lot of people who suffered from frostbite, and one guy actually became disabled for the rest of his life from severe frostbite. So you couldn't forage because most stuff was dead. Once you reached the north, like there's really nothing that you can eat. So you can pack your dried meat and cornbread, which is what a lot of people did. Those were the two most common things I've read about in narratives that people packed. It's only going to last but a minute, right? Even if you only allow yourself a bite every so often, it's not a lot to sustain you. And as much as you want to think that people were hunting and killing squirrels and turtles and different things like that.
Like you was on the Oregon Trail, right?
People weren't eating squirrel sushi on the way to freedom, okay? It was they were trying to get out of Dodge. They were trying to be free. Because you couldn't be starting fires unless you were in the mountains.
Yeah.
Because you can see his smoke for miles.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
would have been a clear indicator of they had to go. They had to go. So he just made this decision, like, I've done this during the most difficult time, and I made it.
Yeah.
I know that pistol scene was what really helped us. So this time I'm going to take 3 pistols. And $22 back then would have been much more substantial. I don't know the exact amount, but I think it would have been hundreds of dollars. So he knew that if he needed to, a lot of people think traveling on the Underground Railroad was free, and it wasn't. There were a lot of people who did walk, and yes, there's no cost to walk. But a lot of people got rides on wagons. Those folks, these Underground Railroad conductors weren't just doing this kind of stuff out of the goodness of their heart. This was their business. People were getting paid. People were paying for a seat or a space in a boxcar. So people were riding trains, people were riding boats. These captains had fees that they required for people to get on, because they weren't just risking their freedom and steep fines just because they felt like slavery was an injustice, right? And some of them may or may not have even felt that. Some of them might have just felt like, this is a good business move for me.
It's a business model,
Yeah, right. It's all business. So having that amount of money might have, in his head, he might have thought, well, I won't have my mom walk all the way like I did. What I'll probably do is take advantage of some of these other systems, and I'll have enough money so that I can do it. So he got to Canada, got his job, starts tucking money aside specifically for his freedom journey, right? And he got down there, wasn't able to get his mom, but he did get his sister, his sister's husband, and a friend of his, and they made it successfully back to Canada.
Wow, that's dope. And you brought up something very interesting, because I don't think a lot of people were or are necessarily aware that it was a business model, and that's why these different societies were raising money, because people had to be paid in order to do X, Y, and Z, and all those things in which you had mentioned were at risk, but also their lives. Like, people were risking their own lives, whether you were white or you were a person of color that was part of the Underground Railroad. You could have been killed as well, with aiding these quote unquote fugitives, these freedom seekers. And so, you've done so much in various different states: Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Connecticut, right? Like, you're always here and there. I want you to tell people where to find you real quick before we jump into a couple of other questions.
Oh, yes. So you can follow me on social media at UGR3Day. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and I also have a YouTube channel where I upload a lot of the reels from Instagram. So if you miss it, you can always go back and watch that. You can also visit my website, www.ugr3day.com. Keep abreast of events that are coming up, tours, the latest and greatest. You can order the magazine, and you can also order our new comic book.
Yep, show us the comic book real quick. I'm gonna order mine. Check it out, y'all.
Yeah, so this is a true story about children who fought off attackers as they were traveling through Delaware, and they made it to freedom. So it takes place. It's called the Centerville Escape of 28. So there were 28 people who were escaping, but 17 of those 28 were children, and they were small children. And Centerville is just a smidge north of Wilmington, just before you hit the Pennsylvania line, going into Chester County, so Kennett Square, that whole area. So at this point, when they're attacked, they were maybe a mile, maybe two at the most from freedom.
Okay.
And here come these Irish drunk guys who decide they just sort of attack this black group of people because they just want to. There was a lot of animosity, probably more than just Delaware and Pennsylvania, but I'll just speak for Delaware for now. Irish people felt like a lot of free blacks were taking their jobs. Mm-hmm. We were getting the jobs because we were willing to get paid at a rate that the Irish people were saying, no, I want more, I want more. Mm-hmm. Well, that was your choice, right? So, but whatever the case, they attacked this group, and these kids were armed and ready. And I will just leave it at that. They had sticks, corn cutters, rocks. The youngest, ready. I mean, even the 2-week-old, it wasn't fighting, but everybody else had something, and they literally fought their way to freedom. So that's what this comic book is about. This is the first in the series. It's all African American characters, and they reach deep within themselves to have this power to overcome. The second one is coming out in February, and that will be children on the underground through maritime escapes.
Okay, nice. So, in discussing things about the Underground Railroad and various different entities that are baked within it, some people may not necessarily know what positions people played as it relates to the titles along the Underground Railroad. So, do you mind telling the audience about the titles that people were holding? Yes.
So, an Underground Railroad conductor is the person who guided people, and that was people of all ages. I've read of small children who drew maps and took freedom seekers for part of the way, to a man who was almost 70 years old who walked people to a certain point. So there were some cases where people could get directions and just go, and then there were other situations, particularly with larger groups, where they actually needed the assistance of someone who knew the lay of the land in case they needed to duck and dive, right? Then you had Underground Railroad station masters. Those were people who took care of folks who arrived somewhere, and that station could have been a church, it could have been a home, it could have been a barn, and they took care of food, clothing, bandaging wounds, emotional trauma. They took care of making sure that people got from their place to the next place. So they were connected. And particularly, well, in most places, I think I'm pretty confident to say, every 10 to 20 miles, there was another station. And they were in a zigzag motion because it's easier to find you if you go in a straight line, but if you're doing all of this and going out of the way to get to the north, it's going to be harder to catch up with you. Makes sense. Those underground stations were sometimes underground. They were sometimes a person's root cellar. It might be an attic, it might be a barn, it might be a hidden room. In Delaware, we have a place that has a hidden room within a wall, right? So there's a panel that you slide. I call it the Scooby-Doo house. People could literally go hide in the wall, slide the couch in front. Nobody knows. Come on in, search, because no one's looking inside a wall. Then you had people who have general terms like operatives or Underground Railroad agents. Those were just helpers. So within that broad scope, you can include the Quaker sewing circles who made clothing and made sure that there was a constant supply coming in for all ages and different sizes of people for different seasons at these underground stations. But you also had folks who were raising money for freedom. There were people because the Underground Railroad network did purchase freedom. They did pay legal fees. There were attorneys who were involved. People, there were court cases that needed people needed representation. Then you also had people who, I have to come up with a name. There isn't like a name for them, but they were the eavesdroppers of society, right? So I'm not physically involved per se, but I am someone you can rely on a consistent basis to go listen and to different conversations in the community So I can find out if patrollers have been spotted in the area, or if somebody is looking for their missing people. Then I can go back and tell those Underground Railroad agents or station masters that they need to go a different way because this is what I've heard, or what I've seen. So you had those folks too. So it was a really vast system, and it was an international system.
Yes.
So you had funders from overseas who were literally paying to help for this cause.
Most definitely. Yeah, it was definitely not something that was very siloed, for sure. So to kind of close this out of all the things in history that a person can choose from, whether they feel as if they've become an expertise at it or just really, really good at it, what was it about the Underground Railroad that made you sink your teeth in and go as far as you have gone and will go as it relates to research and educating the masses about it?
That's a good question. So the background is I'm a marathoner, and I call it runner's ADHD. I don't like to run in the same place over and over and over again. I need to have different routes, and I was training with a friend, and my job was always to find us a different road to run on. And that's how I came across the Harriet Tubman Byway in Delaware. And I said to her, of course, not knowing at the time how vast this was. I didn't know it was like over 100 miles. I said, oh, let's do our 20 on the Underground Railroad. She was like, oh, that's great. And then I found out the mileage, and of course, we didn't do it. But marathon passed. I now don't like running, and I'm like, but there was something about the idea of connecting with that road that stuck with me, and I couldn't shake it. So that was fall of 2018. And in the spring, I reached back out to her and I said, okay, I have this idea. What if we walk it, we don't run it, and we split it up over 3 days, and we do 60 miles of it? And that's actually how UGR 3-Day came about, because we started walking the Underground Railroad. So what I decided in doing that, it was actually not intended to be like a business. It was supposed to be a one-time event. In my head, it was supposed to be a one-time event just for my birthday. Yeah. And I knew that I wanted it to be more than just a walk. I wanted it to be an experience. And to do that, I knew that meant I had to really dive into the research and get to know the stories and be able to share it in a way where it became immersive, where people felt like I'm not the same person when I finish this.
Most definitely.
And once I started researching and learning about the resilience and all the people who were involved, I mean, growing up, I never heard much about the Underground Railroad. And as a young adult, everything I heard about people who were helping were Quakers. And I didn't know that there was a large free black community everywhere. Helping
everywhere,
people,
literally.
And that the free black folks were the foundation of the Underground Railroad. And so once I started finding all these stories of these creative ways that people escaped and large pieces of pottery and these false bottom wagons, it pulled me in.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't let go. And I knew that this was something I just want to know more. I want to know more. I want to know more. And now that's where I am. It evolved into the business. And I mean, even now, like, I can't get enough of the information. I'm always researching and reading. I'm fascinated, impressed by their strength, their resilience, and the ability to be able to unify for a large cause and be internationally impactful.
So needless to say, you may not necessarily be doing crossword puzzles when you get up in age sitting out on the front porch. You'll still be doing Underground Railroad history research, right?
Yeah, I told my daughter,
and genealogy.
I was like, I'm never going to retire. I'm going to get a bench in a park, and I'm going to just sit there, and whoever walks by, I'm just going to start. You know, people feel pressure to listen to old people talk.
Right, exactly.
I'm just going to sit there, and I'm just going to tell it.
Saying, come meet me by this bench. Meet me at this bench tomorrow too, right? Like,
right.
We are best friends at this point.
Right.
But that's good stuff. And you know, the reason why I wanted to do this some days before Christmas is because I just want people to be mindful. You know what I'm saying? It's just like with any other holidays when we talk about Thanksgiving and indigenous folks as well as black folks that were, along the Trail of Tears as well, and just, in the different massacres that occurred during those instances with colonization. And, I wanted to do this episode because I feel that most holidays in this country, in the United States, there's always a yeah, but to it. And it's unfortunate that it is. When you think about 4th of July, when you think about Christmas, when you think about New Year's, there's always this yeah, but to it based on things from a historical perspective that can be very conflicting for some folks who may choose to celebrate, or some people that may choose not to celebrate. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that we had this episode on today to just enlighten folks on what Christmas may have meant to individuals that were enslaved. So I greatly appreciate you for coming on today. Show us the book one more time and let people know where you can find you again.
Yes, ugr3day.com or at ugr3day on social media.
Absolutely. So that's it for today's episode, everybody. Thank you for joining. Happy holidays. Stay safe. I am hoping that you have a very prosperous 2025, a very healthy 2025 for you and your loved ones. Thanks, Dion. Obviously, we're going to be talking here soon. And peace and blessings, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.